Fire is the ultimate eraser. It consumes, it purifies, it transforms. In the world of crime, it is a powerful and terrifying tool, often used to destroy evidence, to conceal a crime, to rewrite a narrative in smoke and ash. But sometimes the most damning clue is not what is found in the ashes, but what is missing from them. Sometimes an absence is so profound, so complete, that it becomes a presence in itself, a ghostly void where the truth should be, a silence that screams louder than any confession. This is a story about such a void, a mystery born from flames on a frigid Christmas night, leaving a wound that has never healed in the heart of Appalachia.
Our story takes us to Fayetteville, West Virginia, in the winter of 1945. The Second World War had finally drawn to its bloody conclusion. An exhausted but optimistic nation was turning its eyes toward home, toward peace, toward the quiet promise of family. In this small, bustling coal-mining town, nestled in the rugged mountains, families were preparing for a Christmas unlike any they had known in years, one blessedly free from the shadow of global conflict. For one family in particular, the holiday was meant to be a vibrant celebration of their hard-won American dream. A testament to resilience and hard work in a land of opportunity. They were a cornerstone of their community, a large and lively family known for their work ethic and their bustling home.
That family was the Sodders. George Sodder, an immigrant from Tula, Sardinia, and his wife Jenny had built a life from scratch. Their successful trucking business, hauling coal and dirt for local projects, was a source of immense pride, and their 10 children were their entire world. But George was a man of strong convictions. He was fiercely and very loudly anti-Mussolini, a position that caused considerable friction in a community where loyalties to the old country were often complex and deeply felt. Friends and neighbors would later recall heated arguments in public spaces, passionate disagreements where George's fiery condemnations of fascism would alienate some of his peers. He was a man who made his principles known, for better or for worse, creating ripples that he could never have foreseen. As Christmas 1945 approached, a series of strange and unsettling events began to orbit the Sodder home, like planets moving into a dark and ominous alignment. At the time, they were seen as mere annoyances, the strange static of everyday life that is quickly forgotten. In retrospect, however, they formed a chilling and undeniable prelude to the tragedy. It began weeks earlier with a strange man trying to sell them life insurance. When George vehemently refused, the salesman reportedly snarled at him with venomous specificity. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." The threat was so direct, so hateful, that it lingered with George, a poisonously planted seed of fear. It was a curse spoken into existence. The ominous occurrences didn't stop there. Another stranger, pretending to look for work, came to the house and pointed out the 2 fuse boxes on the exterior wall. He warned George that the wiring was faulty and would undoubtedly cause a fire one day. This was deeply unsettling to George, as he had just had the entire house professionally rewired, and the local power company had inspected it and declared it perfectly safe. Then there was the matter of the ladder. George's heavy-duty extension ladder, a vital tool for his business and home maintenance, always rested in the same spot against the house. A few days before Christmas, he noticed it was gone. He and his older sons searched the property, puzzled. They couldn't imagine who would steal such a cumbersome object. They eventually found the ladder, inexplicably tossed in a steep embankment about 75 feet away from the house. They brushed it off as a bizarre prank, retrieved it, and leaned it back in its usual spot against the side of the home. On Christmas Eve itself, the final pieces fell into place. The older of the younger children, Maurice, Martha, and Louis, had been allowed to stay up late to play with their new toys, a special Christmas treat. Their mother, Jenny, had agreed on the condition that they remember to do their evening chores, feeding the cows and closing the chicken coop, before heading up to their shared attic bedroom for the night. Lost in the excitement of new games and presents, the children forgot. The animals were left unattended, and the coop remained open to the cold. At approximately 12:30 a.m., with most of the family asleep, the phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the quiet of the house. It jolted Jenny from her sleep. On the other end of the line, a woman she didn't know asked for a name she didn't recognize. When Jenny explained that she must have the wrong number, she didn't receive the customary apology. Instead, she heard the distinct sound of strange, loud laughter and the clinking of glasses, as if from a raucous party. Then the caller hung up abruptly. Shaken and unnerved by the odd encounter, Jenny walked through the downstairs area to check on the house. She noticed, with a flicker of annoyance that would later turn to cold dread, that the children had left the lights on and the curtains wide open. This small detail, the open curtains, stuck with her. It meant that for hours anyone lurking outside had a clear, unimpeded view into her home, a brightly lit stage showcasing her family's Christmas Eve preparations. She methodically switched off the lights, drew the curtain shut, and returned to bed, completely unaware that she was setting the stage for the final act of her family's life as she knew it. The house fell silent once more, but the sense of peace was a fragile illusion about to be irrevocably shattered. Outside, in the freezing December air, forces were already in motion, hidden by the darkness that Jenny had just tried to shut out. The night was far from over. In reality, it had just begun. At 1:30 a.m., Jenny was awakened again. This time, it wasn't the phone. It was a sharp, percussive thud on the roof, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy rolling down. It was, she would later come to believe with chilling certainty, the sound of an incendiary device, a firebomb, being thrown onto her home. In her sleepy state, she dismissed it as perhaps a piece of ice falling. Just 30 minutes later, she woke for the final time. The house was filled with the acrid, choking smell of smoke. George's office, the very room where the fuse boxes the strange man had commented on were located, was on fire. The flames were an unnatural color, spreading with a speed that defied logic for a simple electrical fire. The house wasn't just burning. It was being devoured.
George, Jenny, and 4 of their children who were sleeping on the lower level, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., scrambled out into the freezing night air. Their first instinct was the primal relief of survival, but their second was pure, unadulterated terror. They screamed for Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty in the attic bedroom above. There was no response but for the roar of the flames. The central staircase, their only path to the second floor, was now a raging column of fire, completely impassable. George's mind flashed to the ladder, the one he had found in a ditch just days earlier. It should have been leaning against the house, his fail-safe, but as he ran to the spot, his heart sank into a pit of cold dread. In the chaos and blinding smoke, it was gone again.
The sequence of systematic failures that followed is, to this day, one of the most suspicious and hotly debated elements of the entire case. With the latter gone, Plan B was the trucks. George, a powerful man, thought he could drive one of his large work trucks to the side of the house and climb on top to reach the attic window. He jumped into the first truck and turned the key. The engine sputtered and died. He tried the second truck, his other reliable workhorse. It, too, was dead. Both vehicles, which had been running perfectly just the day before, were suddenly and inexplicably useless. It was as if their very ability to function had been deliberately neutralized, another escape route silently eliminated before it could even be attempted by the desperate father.
With all of George's options exhausted, Plan C was the telephone. His daughter, Marion, sprinted to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. She burst in and grabbed their phone, but the line was dead. Another neighbor, seeing the blaze from a distance, also tried to call for help, but couldn't get an operator. A man who was at a nearby tavern saw the fire from the road and ran inside to use their phone. Again, he could not get an operator to connect his call. It wasn't a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was a systematic isolation.
The Sodder family, in their most desperate hour of need, had been completely and methodically cut off from all hope of help. They were alone, watching their home and potentially their children be consumed by the flames. The Fayetteville Fire Department, headquartered a mere 2.5 miles away, finally arrived on the scene at 8 a.m. They were 7 hours late. By then, the Sodder home was no longer a house. It was a smoldering crater. A blackened basement filled with charred timbers and ash, still emitting a weak, defeated smoke into the cold morning air. Chief F.J. Morris's excuse for the unconscionable delay has since become infamous in the annals of true crime. He claimed he didn't know how to drive the fire truck and had to wait for another firefighter who was available to be found. In a town built on the labor of coal miners and truck drivers, the idea that the fire chief couldn't operate his own engine struck many not just as incompetent, but as utterly unbelievable.
The excuse felt less like a reason and more like a poorly constructed alibi. A deflection designed to obscure a deeper, more troubling truth. The fire, which had raged with such unnatural intensity, had burned itself out in just 45 minutes, leaving behind a scene of total devastation. The family stood together, shivering in the cold, their hearts shattered, preparing themselves for the grim task of finding the remains of their 5 beloved children. They expected a tragedy, but what they were about to encounter was something far stranger. A discovery, or lack thereof, that would launch one of the most enduring and heartbreaking mysteries in American history. The fire was over, but the true horror was just beginning to unfold. Within days, the official story was cemented with a speed that felt indecent. The cause of the fire was ruled as faulty wiring. The 5 missing children were declared to have perished in the blaze. Case closed. Death certificates were issued with a haste that was shocking even for the time, a bureaucratic finality that the Sodders refused to accept. Their grief was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to pull them under, but it was quickly matched by a burning sense of injustice and a list of questions that demanded answers. Why had the ladder been moved? Why had the trucks failed? Why was the phone line dead? And most pressingly, if the fire was hot enough to cremate 5 bodies, why was the rest of the house not more thoroughly destroyed? Jenny Sodder, a homemaker transformed into a relentless investigator by grief, began her own crusade for the truth. A practical woman, she turned to science, conducting morbid but necessary experiments in her yard. She would burn animal bones, chicken bones, beef joints, small animal carcasses, in a container to see if the chief's story held up. It didn't. No matter how hot she made the fire, fragments always remained.
She consulted an employee at a local crematorium who confirmed her darkest suspicions, stating that human bones are some of the last things to surrender to flame and always remain even after hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sodder house fire had lasted a mere 45 minutes. The official story was not just unlikely, it was scientifically impossible.
Feeling dismissed by local authorities, the Sodders reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, pleading for help. The director, J. Edgar Hoover himself, personally replied to their letters. While he expressed sympathy for their plight, he stated that the case was a local matter, and the FBI had no jurisdiction to intervene unless they could prove that a kidnapping had crossed state lines, a fact they could not possibly establish without their children. The Sodders were on their own, trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, where the very people meant to protect them seemed determined to close the book on their tragedy. This official resistance only deepened their conviction that something was terribly wrong, that they were not just victims of a fire, but of a conspiracy. When spring finally came and the last of the snow melted, George Sodder took matters into his own hands. In an act of both desperation and defiance, he brought in a bulldozer and began to carefully sift through the debris of his former home. He was searching for his children's remains, hoping to give them a proper Christian burial, but he was also erasing the site of his family's destruction, vowing to turn it into a memorial. He sifted through every inch of that basement. He found melted but still recognizable pots, pans, and even the fragile, charred remnants of a dictionary. But he found not a single human bone, not a tooth, not one single shred of proof that his 5 children had died there that night. On the spot where their bustling home once stood, he planted a garden, a living memorial to the children he now firmly believed were still alive. His search of the ashes yielded another disturbing clue. A small, hard, green, rubber-like object. Puzzled by it, he showed it to a military expert, who suggested it could be the casing for a pineapple-style incendiary bomb, a napalm grenade, the likely source of the thud on the roof and the unnaturally intense fire. This physical evidence directly contradicted the faulty wiring theory and pointed unequivocally to arson. The clues that pointed away from an accident and towards a crime continued to pile up, forming a mountain of doubt against the official narrative. Sightings and witness accounts, dismissed by police, began to trickle in, fueling the Sodders' hope. A woman who ran a motel between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed to have seen the children in a car on the very night of the fire.
She said they were accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian extraction, who seemed to be keeping the children from being seen. Another woman in Charleston saw the children the next morning and said they were with the same group. A bus driver who drove the route late that night swore he saw someone throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house from the road. Each testimony, each fragment of a story painted a picture not of an accident, but of a meticulously planned and executed kidnapping. In 1952, convinced that a massive injustice had occurred, George and Ginny escalated their search and took their private pain public in a dramatic and enduring way. They erected a large, imposing billboard on Route 16, a main thoroughfare through West Virginia. The faces of their 5 lost children, captured in haunting black-and-white photographs, stared out at the passing traffic. Alongside them was a detailed account of the fire, the suspicious circumstances, and a promise of a $5,000 reward for information, which they later doubled to $10,000, a fortune at the time. The billboard transformed the Sodder case from a local tragedy into a piece of American folklore, a constant public accusation against the official story. It stood as a testament to a parent's undying hope, a landmark of grief that would remain for over 35 years. For 2 decades, the billboard was a silent beacon, generating thousands of tips, most of them cruel hoaxes or dead ends. The family chased down every lead, traveling across the country at their own expense, their hope dwindling with each failed trip. Then, in 1968, more than 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived that seemed to change everything. It was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, and was addressed simply to Jenny. Inside was a photograph of a man in his late 20s. He had dark, curly hair, a slightly offset nose, and an intense, almost haunted gaze. To the Sodders, he was the spitting image of their son Louis, all grown up. The resemblance was uncanny, from the shape of his ears to the arch of his eyebrows. On the back of the photo, a cryptic, almost frantic message was scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Isle Boys, A90132 or 35. The message was a confounding puzzle. Frankie was not the name of any of the Sodder brothers. Isle Boys could be a typo for little boys. The numbers were a complete mystery. Was this a genuine message from their long-lost son, or the most elaborate and cruel hoax yet? The Sodders, their hope reignited to a fever pitch, chose to believe. They immediately hired a private investigator from Washington, D.C. to travel to Kentucky and look into the lead. They believed this was finally the breakthrough they had prayed for 23 long, agonizing years. The investigator took their money, traveled to the area, and was never heard from again. He vanished without a trace, submitting no reports and never contacting the Sodders again. The lead, which had seemed like their best and perhaps final hope, vanished as mysteriously as their children had, adding another layer of tragedy and potential conspiracy to the already labyrinthine case. It was a dead end so absolute that it felt like a deliberate warning, a clear message to stop digging. The family was devastated, their brief moment of hope brutally extinguished. With a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but no definitive proof, the Sodder case became a canvas for theories, each attempting to explain the impossible. Let's examine the most prominent ones. Theory 1. The Sicilian Mafia. The motive? Retaliation for George's public, relentless criticism of Mussolini. In this scenario, the fire was a professional diversion. The children were abducted by organized criminals, spirited away in the chaos, and either killed or sold. The coordinated failure of the phone lines, the trucks, and the fire department's response points to a level of sophistication and influence far beyond a simple grudge. The witness sighting of children with Italian-looking adults supports this, but the lack of a ransom note or any claim of responsibility leaves it as a powerful, yet unproven hypothesis. Theory 2. A black market adoption ring. This theory is perhaps even more disturbing because it suggests a crime motivated not by hate but by profit. It suggests that children weren't killed but stolen to be sold. In the post-war era, illegal adoptions were not unheard of. A well-connected but unscrupulous individual could have seen the large Sodder family as a source. In this scenario, someone with local knowledge knew the children could be taken and given to wealthy, childless families who would ask no questions. This would explain why they were kept alive and why no remains were found. The Kentucky photo showing a healthy young man lends some credence to this idea. He wasn't harmed, he was relocated and given a new identity, forever severed from his past. Theory 3. A local cover-up and accidental fire. This is the most complex and perhaps most cynical theory. It posits that the fire was an accident, but that local officials, perhaps related to or friends with someone who might be implicated in the faulty wiring or another accidental cause, staged a cover-up to protect one of their own. Perhaps the fire chief himself was criminally negligent, and his story of not being able to drive the truck was a lie to cover his tracks. In this version, the story of the kidnapping was fabricated, or at least encouraged by the authorities to deflect blame. It explains the gross negligence of the fire department and the rushed death certificates. But it fails to explain the external factors, the cut phone line, the moved ladder, and the credible sightings from people with nothing to gain. Each theory explains a piece of the puzzle, but none can account for all of it. The Mafia theory explains the professionalism, but not the lack of a message. The adoption theory explains the missing bodies, but not the specific threats against George.
The cover-up theory explains the local incompetence, but not the external sabotage. The truth, it seems, lies somewhere in the frustrating, overlapping space between them all. For decades, the Sodder family lived in this space, replaying the events of that night, poring over the clues, and holding on to the fading hope that one day one of their lost children might just come home. It was a vigil that would consume the rest of their lives.
George Sodder died in 1969. A year after the Kentucky letter arrived, going to his grave without answers, but still believing his children had been stolen from him. After burying her husband, Jenny built a memorial garden on the site of their former home and surrounded herself with the evidence, the billboard and the Kentucky photo, which she placed in a locket. She wore black in mourning every day for the rest of her life until her death in 1989. The remaining Sodder children and their descendants continue the search for the truth to this day, a legacy of grief and determination passed down through generations. The billboard is gone now, but the questions it posed still linger in the Appalachian air.
In the end, we are left where we started, with 5 missing children and a void of unanswered questions. The Sodder case is a perfect storm of credible evidence pointing to a heinous crime, met with staggering official incompetence, or perhaps a chillingly successful cover-up. It is a story about the failure of institutions, but it is also a story about the incredible, indomitable power of a family's love, a love that refused to be extinguished by fire or silenced by time. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be carried, a heavy burden of what-ifs that last forever.
Thank you for joining us in exploring the haunting case of the Sodder children. What do you believe happened on that cold Christmas night? Which theory makes the most sense to you? Join the discussion in the comments. If you find these enduring mysteries as compelling as we do, please support our channel by liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the stories that refuse to be forgotten.